Hello, everybody, and welcome to the brand new episode of Legends of LOR. I am here today with Walkabout once again, but we
Hey,
gotta
what's
keep
going
the
on?
tradition of having a new person every week, and we also have Stay Woke here this time.
A new challenger arrives. Hello, I'm Stay Woke, the tournament historian and stats guy. Here to talk about the patch notes of the upcoming 4.20 Legends of Runeterra.
Can't wait for my spicy 420 patch.
True. But before we delve into that, well, if you want to give us a little bit of your history in card games and how you wound up here.
So back in high school, I actually played a bit of Hearthstone, but I never played it competitively. But rather, I only played the PvE version with the Lich King and everything else. So that was my beginning, and after that I quit Hearthstone because I got bored of the PvE and went into and found Legends of Runeterra after like a friend recommended it to me, and ever since then I've been playing for like open beta for 3 years.
Nice, and you've definitely farmed me a few times while you've been doing that.
Who cracked at making bad decks?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Woke. But with that out of the way, I think it's time to go over the new things we got from this patch, starting with some brand new cards. We got 10 new cards for the variety patch, one for each region. So we'll just go through the patch in order that they get revealed, and we'll start with Ceaseless Sentry, which is Last Breath, draw 1, 2 mana, 2/1 in SI.
I think this card's very strong. Avarosan Sentry is a card that was already kind of, I want to say it was kind of borderline. Now, of course, it was a staple in certain decks like Field Rush, but it didn't see too much play in other, say mid-range Freljord like Ornn, for example. It wasn't a very appropriate choice. I think putting this card in Shadow Isles makes it much more clearly defined in the archetypes that it wants to be in. So, Slay decks with Nasus, for example, definitely would want to consider this card. It opens up ton of card advantage options. It lets them sequence way more plays because they can keep going and not run out of gas. I think this card is a pretty strong choice.
Yeah, for sure. Woke, do you have any thoughts on it?
I think it's a medium choice, but due to it has a lot of synergy with the SI glimpse and everything, but it's not really an ideal two drop technically speaking. With like cards like Redeem Prodigy, Phantom Butler, Minion, and the like, all in SI, you're not always going to be willing to like switch between those options. Those two drops are a lot more impactful to the game state when you're drawing them versus this new Sentry card. But it is still an option that you want to like keep in mind when you don't really have anything to put into like your control decks.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is definitely going to see more play in the more slower controlling SI decks. I think those decks are definitely going to want this more. But like one thing I'm thinking of is if you're playing Shadow Isles Freljord, if you wanted to have more copies of Avarosan Sentry in your deck, you can now run up to 6 copies, which is pretty neat.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, so that's one thing. And another thing is that like for specifically the Slay package, now you have a pretty good. This is a pretty decent option to include in those decks because killing it will help you cycle through your deck, find your more important cards, and there aren't really that many better 2 drops for the Slay decks. It's like Fading Icon is the main competition for this card, but I think drawing 1 is probably better than what Fading Icon offers, so you might switch it out for this. I think this is a
Yes,
pretty interesting card. Yeah, go ahead, Woki.
I would agree on that, except you have to consider that Slay decks aren't always in a control manner. They're more mid-range in that they sometimes use was a Butcher for their like one drops to get an early advantage for aggro. So you might not actually want to like switch it for the draw card instead.
I could see this card participating in that mindset, right? So it's a blocker on turn 2. It's not the best blocker, but it does give you more cards, and that leads to more blockers. So it doesn't necessarily fail at that role either. Although it's not as ideal as something else like Fading Icon.
Right.
Makes
But still
sense.
something to keep in mind.
I think this card is 100% going to hit some decks. Probably more the controlling decks than any of the aggressive things. And They Who Endure cries a little more, as one of its cards is now in another region. But moving on to the next one, we have Generous Gemcrafter, a 3-mana 2/3 in Targon that says when you play a spell, grant a random ally in hand +1/+1.
On the fence about this card. There are definitely some meme strategies. So, people have talked about Call of the Mountain or whatever it is, fill your hand with gems, and Revna, stuff like that. You can definitely use it to power up something in hand. But I think the deck building cost creates a lot of awkward scenarios where you want to very meticulously balance the number of units and spells you run, because you need to be buffing units that actually matter, but you also need to not be blowing your entire hand of spells just for that singular effect and not getting anything out of it. I don't know how competitive it will be. I don't think it's that good, but I definitely think it's funny.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the most obvious comparison for this card is Starlit Seer, which is Freljord, but it buffs the top of the deck. So, like, the biggest difference is that this is 3 mana, whereas Seer is 2. And I think that 3 mana is a huge hindrance for this card, because I think it's really hard to fit this into your curve for what you want from the deck. At 3 mana, it starts coming down a little bit later than you would like, I would think.
Yeah.
Because you have to play it early to get any value from this. This isn't like a card you can drop after you later on in the game, and then you're just it's just basically a dead card later on in the game. Another nice thing about this though, compared to Starlit Seer, is that this gives you more control over what you buff. Because Starlit Seer could be any of the cards in your deck, and you're not always guaranteed to draw that card.
I think it's a better region than Starlit Seer. Freljord is not exactly the spells region. You can pair it with a good spells region, like Piltover or Ionia, but Targon is already a decent spells choice. You have access to doing stuff with gems. You have Pale Cascade. The new Divine Blessing is sort of a 2-for-1 for this card, since you are double buffing something in hand. So I think the region is better, but I agree. I think ultimately what it comes down to is the opportunity cost. You want this to buff something in hand early game. So, like this with Ionia and buffing a Zed could be pretty strong, but you're delaying your curve on Zed by playing this instead, which doesn't feel very good.
Yeah, I think this card is probably going to end up being too slow at 3 mana, but we'll have to wait and see if anyone can crack the code.
So from what I think of for this card, there's a lot of gem synergy, like with Kotis, the Lunar Kotis with the weapons, but there's also a lot of synergy with Boundary City units, elusives, such as the unit that generates pranks as well. So maybe you could slow down your opponent's game plan with these spells and buff up your own units while you're at it. So that might be something you might want to consider.
There's one
also
that has
Yodo
Nexus
Squatter.
Strike. Isn't there one that has Nexus Strike make a prank?
That is Kelp Maidens.
Kelp Maidens.
Yeah, the 2 mana 2/1.
So there's something that we might want to consider there.
Yeah, so that does help feed into it a little bit, although Kelp Maidens before getting buffed is quite weak to any interaction at all. So
I could see something like the Zoe Diana Bandle value decks that were around for a little while doing something like that, because they already have a pretty interesting mix of units and spells, and a lot of their units make spells, so they run Conchologists, stuff like that. That's the kind of deck that could do that kind of game plan.
Right. So yeah, this is a region combination that we want to look for when we're playing this card. There's also a Bilgewater combination, but we're not really too sure about that with the Nami nerf ever since then.
The issue is that there's probably... I don't know if we want to go for the Bilgewater direction. I mean, maybe this could revive Nami, who knows? We'll have to wait and see. Moving on to the next one. Royal Badger Bear has gotten an upgrade, except it hasn't because it's still a 3/4. We have Blocking Badger Bear, a 3 mana 4/4 in Demacia that can block units with elusive. They did it, guys. They made a creature with reach, aka it can block elusive.
This card is amazing.
Yeah. Oh, also importantly, this card is also an elite, which does actually matter.
This is like elitism, honestly. They gave him armor and they made him an elite. Like, come on, this is a bit too much.
Like this is a turn 3/5/5 with Battlesmith. That's a pretty well statted unit.
They're just
Yeah.
flexing on poor old loyal Badger Bear.
But other people have pointed out that the game already has 3 mana 4/4s, and while I think 3 mana 4/4, without context is fine, giving it the ability to block elusives, which first I do want to just say that's a very necessary line of text. Maybe not on this guy, but on units in general. I would like to see more of that. But I think also that, and also it's an elite. It's got a lot of small extra synergies built in on top of already being a solidly statted unit on curve. I think it might be just slightly overtuned. But as a Demacia fan, I'm really excited to play this guy. He slots right into my, all in on counteracting whatever is interactive in the meta kind of decks. So you run this guy with, nice stony suppressors and all that, and just run all the most obnoxious don't interact with me cards possible.
For sure. Stops the elusive beatdown plan. And blocking elusive isn't Demacia's identity because of cards like Sharp Sight and technically Silverwing Diver.
So, okay. I mean, I wouldn't add that, but sure. So, like, yeah, we could, like, probably add this into, like, the current, like, elite stack, as for 5/5 on turn 3 is very strong. Other Demacia decks may not be too keen on adding this, because they might still want the rally synergy, even though that has been nerfed quite a bit. So we're mostly looking at, like, decks that rely on stats.
Yeah, I think outside of elites, I don't actually know if this card's going to be seeing any play. Because, Walk did mention earlier that this is a 3 mana 4/4, and that we've had other ones in the past. I think an important context for that is that this is the first 3 mana 4/4 with upside instead of a downside. Because, like, the other ones I'm thinking of are Kiri the Student, which is a 3/3 that comes a 4/4 if you predicted. And when Yordle Newbie before the rework used to be a 2/3 that became a 4/4 if you had 2 cards in hand. This is the first 3 mana 4/4 that just has upside of it can also block elusives. Because the last time we had a 3 mana 4/4 with no downside was Loyal Badger Bear, which is still a 3/4, which I think is pretty insane that they didn't make any changes to Badger Bear, so they have literally strictly better Badger Bear in the game now.
Personally, I think Badger Bear needs to become a token card.
I honestly would not oppose that, because I don't think that card is going to see any play.
I mean, like, who would notice? That you could literally do that in a patch, not put it in the patch notes, and it could go a week or more before someone says anything.
Hey man, that one new player's like, hey guys, I tried to put my Badger Bear in my deck and I can't find it. What's going on?
But they're new players, so they wouldn't even know about Badger Bear.
Yeah, exactly.
They wouldn't know where to complain.
So no one would actually know.
I give it. I think it could go a full 2 weeks before someone pings Ruben on Twitter about it.
No, I think it could go for like 3 months.
If they actually just did that right now and didn't tell anyone, and see how long it took people to notice. Rotation's coming early, guys. Except we're just like rotating it to a token.
The rotation's a little bit more permanent.
Yeah. All right. I think it's enough thoughts about the Badger Bear. It's time to go on to the Banana Blaster, a 4 mana 2/2 in Bandle City that says play, deal damage equal to my power to a unit. Also, it is a Yordle for that subtag. So this is obviously meant to get its power buffed. And if you buff its power, it'll deal more damage when it comes into play. But at a baseline, 4 mana, deal 2 to a unit, and have a 2/2 body left behind. What do you guys think of this?
This unit's kind of awkward.
Well, okay, in a vacuum, this is not the greatest card, right? Like 2/2 for 4 mana isn't that great. I mean, it still destroys like a small unit, but like overall in the bigger game plan, it's not really going to win against mid-range decks as much. But when you're thinking about the synergies, such as like Bird, that's also in Battle City, a 4 mana and 3/3 that gets it turns into 4-mana 3/3, which dealing 3 is very important for dealing with champions, dealing with important followers, and all that. So it could be potentially a very good card. In 3/3 stats,
This does say unit and not champions, which I think is or unit and not follower, which I think is a huge upside to let you hit champions as well.
It definitely does interact favorably with some of the squishier champions. So it kills Twisted Fate, kills LeBlanc, kills Draven. Very sad. I definitely think that so if you want to compare it to another similar card that already exists, the Maker or whatever it's called, the Ionia card that does the same thing but recalls, that card was quite playable before Bard got nerfed. In Ari Bard, Zed Bard, that card saw plenty of play. I think this is not terrible with Vandal Noxus that wants to set up damaged condition on enemy units and also be a little bit more defensive before you set up your finishers like Swain or a randomly generated 7 drop off of Nora, whatever. It is a skill, so it can't be abused in a super crazy way by, say Soul Cleave or anything like that. I guess Jin could run it, although it seems kind of terrible for a deck like that.
Yeah, it doesn't seem great for Jin. I guess another thing, since you mentioned Maker, is to point out the downsides that came with that ability as well, which is, one, the opponent, since it's a skill that goes on the stack, the opponent can interact with it. Like, if they kill your Banana Blaster with the skill on the stack, since it's dead, they won't push the damage through. Additionally, if you're playing against something like Freljord, they could frostbite your unit, and now it has 0 power, so it doesn't deal any damage.
Sad.
So there is also some bit of counterplay to this as well. That I think it's probably an okay card, but I think it's not going to see play outside of anything that can buff its power. I think if you're playing as a 4-mana 2/2, it's not worth it at all.
right.
All right. Well, I think that's all the thoughts we have on this card. So let's go to the most. I think I'm gonna say this is the funniest card of the bunch of new cards we got for the variety patch, which is the Priestess of Desert Light. It is a 6-mana 4/4 in Shurima with round start, deal 4, draw a champion, or if your deck started with 6+ different champions, summon it instead.
This card's really bad.
This card is absolutely hilarious in singleton format, where you're going to be playing 6 different champions. And I think it's like actually unplayable and constructed.
I think this card is possibly playable in the singleton format. I definitely would literally never want to run more than 1 copy of this card, and even in singleton, which of course I only can run 1 copy, it's still questionable. I mean, it's a big mana commitment, even for a potentially powerful effect. You must run 6 champions to get the benefit, which significantly reduces the possibility of getting something absurdly powerful. You would want something like, I don't know, if you were playing a Slay deck, like getting a Nasus is nice, or a Viego. If you were playing Targon, getting Aurelion Soul is nice. But if you are jamming your deck full of Haymaker champions, and you also randomly decide to run a 6-mana card that has to survive a full turn to get the effect, I think that you are investing in a very questionable game plan.
I mean, it's just the fact that like you're literally paying 6 mana for, and like those champions have to be at least 6 mana or higher, to actually get a decent payoff from it.
Yeah.
And the fact is, like, your opponent can even like interact with it, so like you're already paying a downside, and instead of like just drawing the card instead. Like, there's a lot of decks that like already like draws its champions. For example, Mono Shirima, right? Predicts other decks like that. Like,
yeah, and Mono Shurima gets to keep the unit that draws the champion, which means it's a blocker on board, and it buffs the champion for 2 less mana.
right.
I mean, hey, this can summon the champion, though. So if we have something like Aesol, it's a 4-mana discount. And it will be really funny when you do that.
I can't wait to pay 6 mana to pull Teemo out of my deck.
True.
And the Shurima and like Target combination is not the greatest either.
Hey, we
like,
have Talia Malphite in that combination. How
No.
dare you say it's bad? Alright, but on another funny note, if we can give this thing something like Unyielding Spirit and keep it around, it does do this every round start. So it manages to not die, you do get the effect again, which could be really funny.
I have to pay 14 mana for that, but yeah, that is really funny.
No, I think this card will see the most play in Nora decks. Not because they'll run it, but because they're gonna hit it off a portal randomly. With leveled
You
Nora.
make a fair point.
Yeah, but also something Tri-Beam buff. Anyways, moving on. We have, speaking of Tri-Beam region, I would argue one of the best cards from this group of cards, which is Formula, a 6-mana PNZ burst spell that says, draw 2, refill your spell mana. I have to say this card looks very good for decks like Heimerdinger Jace.
I think this card is broken.
I think this card is very good. It's like a 6+ cost card for Heimer Jace, so that triggers those effects. It refills your spell mana, so if you have full spell mana, it only costs 3 mana, and it can help you set up to like go double 6+ cost turns a lot easier. It draws 2, so it replaces it, so it helps you give you more fuel and later in the game. I think this is an amazing card for those decks.
Over and Zon has been having a problem lately where they keep printing a redundancy of effects. So we were talking about how, having to run one-ofs of cards as a deck building cost to Seraphine became much less of a restriction when they printed several iterations of Mystic Shot, right? So they had the Discordant whatever that was in the Cultist region, which is basically a Mystic Shot, some Fumes, High Note. Suddenly you're looking at running 5 different versions of Mystic Shot. And Card Advantage has not been too far off in that direction either. We've seen plenty of card generation. We've got Reggie, we've got Bar, we've got Time Trick, we've got Drum Solo. We have way, way too much already, in my opinion. I think this card's just a little bit too cost efficient. But I don't know if it's still playable at 7. That's the problem.
I don't think this card is nearly as good at 7 mana, for sure. We'll have to see how good this actually ends up being. But like you were saying, this does give PNZ is starting to get a mass overload of draw 2 effects. We just got Drum Solo, which is probably the best draw spell in PNZ, if not one of the best draw spells in the game. And now we also have Formula, so now they get to run this. So decks that run both of them have so much refill from their deck.
And the fact that they come along with some sort of resource regeneration, like refilling spell mana or cost reduction so that you get to play them anyway, I think is a little bit too much for one region to have. If you told me, if this had an extra line of text that was only funny 6 mana cost matters decks get to run this, I'd say, I don't really love it. But I'd be a lot more okay with it. But when we start looking at all of the decks that, Rise is going to run this. Rise doesn't need any help at all. Seraphine players are going to try to run this as well.
Yeah, it's gonna be crazy to see how this is gonna turn out. I think this is going to be a huge boon to the PNZ decks. Do you have any thoughts to add to this, Woke?
Honestly, no. You guys said it all. We can move on to Winter Touch.
All right, Winter's Touch. All right, going on to Freljord. So Winter's Touch is a 4-mana burst Freljord spell that says get an extra mana gem, and then it has Enlightened. I cost 1, draw 1. All right, as someone who has played some Freljord ramp in the past, I think this card is absolutely insane in the ramp decks for a few reasons. First off, I firmly believe that this just replaces Catalyst in those decks, because this is a much better draw on after you've hit 10 mana gems, because it replaces itself and only costs 1. Because a 1 mana cycle later in the game is way better than a 5 mana health potion.
Yeah, I agree, because once you have 10 mana, what you need is to dig for things to do with 10 mana. So your She Who Wins, your Feel the Rush. This card finds those when you've finished doing your early and mid-game ramping, whereas the other ramp spells don't do any of that. I mean, a 6/6 overwhelm is kind of cute for the mystic
Yeah,
the mystic spell.
yeah, I would say Wild Mysticism. I think you still play because of that
I
upside of
agree.
you get a body on board to block with, which will be able to block at least 3 damage usually, if not more, and it can become a win condition later on if you get a 6/6 overwhelm. But the bigger thing for this card is that it's only 4 mana, which is
Right.
huge because now you can play a 2-drop and then you can still ramp the next turn to 5 mana, which is absolutely massive. Because now you can go
This
like one of the biggest issues I have with the ramp archetype is that like if you wanted to play like your ramp card on turn 3, you weren't allowed to like play Avaros and Sentry as a blocker. Winner's Touch lets you play that Sentry as a blocker and then play this, which is huge, I think.
I don't love that ramp is the archetype that's getting support here. I think ramp is already the most viable Freljord archetype in general. Freljord has been having a problem where either all the cards suck and the region isn't played, or the region is played because it is being bloated with 1 or 2 extremely broken cards. So Spirits Unleash is a good example. I love that card, but it is kind of carrying Freljord as a region in a lot of decks at the moment, whereas otherwise you wouldn't necessarily play it. This seems like it's supporting an archetype that already didn't need help compared to something more like Freljord midrange. I mean, like I like Udyr, so I'll use him as an example. But Udyr is a champion that sees basically no play at all. And FTR is already a deck that's completely viable. So, it's kind of like an embarrassment of riches at this point.
Yeah,
I
FCR
would
needed
agree
more
with
help.
that.
All I'm saying is FCR definitely needed more help. Trust.
That's copium. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
lot of things to talk about this card, and that like it decreases a lot of the polarization of like matchups because of the fact that you're able to play a 2-drop on like turn 2, and also it makes sure that like because you can play this card on like turn 3 and turn 4, it makes it so that you can mulligan a less greedier for cards because you are ensured that you are able to carry out a more consistent game plan with this card.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you might just like Freljord is getting another like massive ramp card. So now, like before, it was like just Catalyst and Faces. Now we have Wild Mysticism and this. So like Freljord has quite the boon of ramp cards to choose from, to the point that it's gonna be pretty consistent. They can probably get to 10 mana gems on like turn 7.
Yeah, if you really wanted to go all in on the ramp, I think it's definitely doable. I want to touch back on ramp a little bit later when we get to the nerf section, actually.
Yeah.
But I'll come back to that later.
Alright, I think that's enough for this card. Let's go on to one that's probably not going to be putting up as much discussion, which is Skulking String Puller, a Noxus 6-mana 3/6 spider that has attack, grow other attacking allies' power to mine this round. So at first I didn't think anything much of this card. Is like, okay, it's whatever. It's like 6 mana, grow our allies at 3 power. But then I was reminded of this certain mechanic called Hollowed that exists, and I got a little bit more interested in this card.
The hallowed interaction with this card is pretty good, and Noxus is usually the pairing for Gwen or Demacia. I think that's a powerful interaction, but I don't know that you would replace your usual 6-drop slot, which is the Dancer card, the one that summons an ephemeral
Eternal
copy of your
Dancers.
strongest ally. I cannot see this replacing that card.
I also agree with that. I think Dancers is probably better for that deck than Skulking String Puller. Although Dancers did get a bit worse with the Katarina nerf, since she no longer revives level 1 Katarina over a few of the other units in the deck. But still, I think this is an interesting card, but I don't think it's going to end up seeing much play because I think there's just a bit too slow at the ending of the game.
It's one of those cards that you play in at least Gwen because you don't want to play Katarina for some weird reason.
I mean, we're saying this, and then next week, Rico Rex is gonna make a Freljord Noctis Overwhelm deck where he just puts a Battle Fury on this thing and it makes his Overwhelm units have 11 power.
Wait.
1 more mana, you can build around Argon Cholani instead of this guy and get basically the same effect.
Yeah, that's fair. I think this card's pretty mid. But I think the next card excites me a lot more, which would be the Ionia card, Serene Sky Singer. A 7 mana 3/6 with lifesteal that says, when I'm summoned, reduce the cost of spells in your deck by half, rounded up. I think this is one of my favorite cards in the 10 that are revealed. My other favorite is not been talked about yet, but we'll get to it. But
A lot
yeah,
of potential.
this card has the potential to be insanely broken with Ionia.
Yeah, I'm very on the fence about it.
Hey guys, this is Dragon from the future. Want to give a quick update about Serene Skydancer. So it turns out the rounding effect does not work how I had originally thought it did. When it says it rounds up, it means it rounds up the cost after it's reduced. So for example, a 5-cost spell would get reduced to 3 mana, not 2. So that I still think that card is going to be pretty decent, but it's not nearly as good as I thought it was. But anyways, back to the podcast.
Everything about a few things. So first off, any card that costs for odd that's rounded up, if you have an odd numbered spell, that gets reduced by half of that plus 1. So for example, if you have Deep Med, goes to 2 mana, for example. Also, this card can make Deep Med 2 mana, and with Flow, it's literally free. That's pretty crazy.
Would it calculate based off of the normal cost reduction for Deep Med, so 3 mana, or would it be based on the cost reduction of 2 being calculated afterwards?
So Deep Med specifically says it reduces cost by 2, so it would go afterwards. So it would literally be free because it starts at 5 mana, gets its cost reduced by 3 because it halves the cost rounded up, and then it says when you activate Flow, it costs 2 less. So there you go.
That's fair. A lot of people have compared this card to Back Alley Bar. I think there's some pretty key differences. First and foremost, Back Alley Bar rates a card. So this does not necessarily give you a way to utilize the cost reduction right away. You need to pair it with some sort of very cheap draw effect so that you can actually play these discounted spells.
That's true. When you play it on turn 7, it technically doesn't really do anything because you have to eventually draw the cards that you're discounting. So until you draw the discounted cards, this card isn't helping you with your mana points at all. But once you do start drawing them, then it really starts picking up. And yeah, I think this card definitely has potential though, because the body itself honestly isn't terrible for a control deck. Because 6 health means it's probably not it's not really going to die to damage based removal. And with lifesteal, it can help you heal back some of the HP you get for the tempo loss you're going to get from playing this.
I mean, it is basically just Soul Gorger, but with text.
Yes. And it's also in the region where you can play Green Grade Lookout to reduce its cost.
Oh,
so maybe it's not a turn 7.
Oh,
maybe it's not a turn 7. Maybe it's turn 6. It could be also turn 5 if you play with Shadow Isles and with obvious Islander. So I don't know if it's always going to be on turn 7. Turn 5, turn 6, maybe even turn 4.
So I think this card really wants to be with Piltover. I mean, that's the traditional spell combo that I can think of that would want to abuse spell cost reduction like this. It would basically replace Bar if you wanted to test it out in Seraphine Ionia. And the stats are definitely better than Barkeep. I will say there is not that much value out of playing a second one, because if you're playing that kind of deck, you're already running mostly a fair amount of fairly cheap spells, and when you reduce their cost by half, that's all the value you really need. With Back Alley Bar, each one actually gets a little bit better because the Back Alley Barkeep generates more cards than the previous one.
Alright, so we're saying this, Walk, but it's also insane with expensive spells. So like going with your
Yeah.
P&Z example, and if you play Glorious Evolution in your deck, this makes Glorious Evolution 5 mana,
5 mana.
which is pretty crazy.
Yeah, that's true. I
Another
think
crazy
the
one
Glorious Evolution deck is a good idea of what you could do with this over Bar for sure.
Another crazy one I saw was playing Field of Mina with this card, because all of a sudden your Field of Rush is 6 mana. You can
Right.
double
That's
Field of Rush
hot.
your opponent, and
Yeah.
you can play Field of Rush and hold up Deny.
Wow.
There's
Yeah,
a
that's
lot
pretty
of
good.
interesting games.
And if you play a second one, now your Field of Rush is notifiable, which is even funnier.
I'm also concerned that there's going to be some combos with 1 and 2 mana cantrips, stuff that replaces itself very easily with this card. Because
There's
that is
there are scarier combos with like the 6 and even with the card you just mentioned earlier, Formula. This makes Formula legitimately free to play because Formula
Yeah, I
goes to
know.
3 mana and it refills your spell mana, so it's 3 mana draw 2, refill 3 mana.
It's I wouldn't say PNZ would be the best combo for it, to be honest.
I think PNZ will be a good combo for this card.
It's a decent combo, but we have to consider that like most of the spells are really cheap to begin with, and we want to look at the more expensive spells like Hex Splitter, 3 mana, Glorious Evolution, 5 mana, right? But the question is like, when are you playing those cards, and are they leading to your victory? Because the reason why Back Alley Bar is actually so good is not really just because of the cost reduction. It gives you extra value. It gives you a blocker. It gives you extra cards. It gives you value to the point where you outvalue your opponent in terms of card advantage, not necessarily because of cost reduction. Cost
Right.
reductions help you outvalue your opponent. It's not the same thing as winning. So that's something we have to keep a lot in mind here.
So something black using Black Flame on this because it's a summon something.
That's kind of messed up.
All right. I think we've talked about this card enough, and I want to get onto the card that I like the most out of the reveals from this one. Mischievous Mirai, a 5 mana Bilgewater 3/4 that says when you play a spell, summon a powder keg.
All right.
So, importantly, because of the play cast changes from a while back, this will summon the powder keg before the spell resolves. So if you play like a warning shot, you'll summon the keg, and then the warning shot will deal 2. If you play a fast or slow spell, you get the keg first, and then it'll sit there while the spell's in the stack. And you can stack multiple of them, so you can have like your spell at the end have like 4 or 5 powder kegs powering it up.
Sponsored by Team Keg.
Keg W.
This card's funny. There's a lot of meme deck potential for it. I don't think it's good. The cost is purposely set at a position, 5 mana, where you can't comfortably do anything super combo-y with it. It is just really a slightly more well-statted Funsmith, which already doesn't see play.
All right. Hear me out. Have you heard of this deck called the Immortal Kegs?
Wait.
I have heard of it, and I have never played against it because it's bad.
All right. So we can play Targon, Bilgewater. We can play the 6 mana Divine Judgment card on our keg, which will give it another keg. So we'll have 2 kegs, and then when we warning shot, we'll keep adding another keg to the pile and keep compounding our damage, so we can get to some very high damage values.
Right.
How much mana is that card you're talking about again?
11?
6 mana.
6 plus 5 is 11.
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we probably won't be able to do it the same turn, but if you can get this card down without it dying, you have a very good chance to just combo off and try to win the game the turn afterwards. And it can happen at burst speed. Also, if you're a good player, you'll also always draw all your warning shots, trust.
Oh, thank God.
Another thing about this card is like, technically, if you want to like be a hipster or something with it, you could play it in the typical like Bilgewater decks, and just like stack on like kegs with the flocks and other kill spells and disintegrates, and then make your like freaking blade edge 5 damage or like 6 damage with it. And you also and like you get to like stack it, right? So the opponent isn't really going to be able to stop it at some point.
I think it's in a better region for an effect like Funsmith because you have more cards that you want to pair with kegs. obviously. Make It Rain, Parlay, Warning Shot, things like that. I still think it's just overcosted for what it does.
I will say it is better sad than Funsmith. With 4 HP, it is less likely to get killed off immediately, which is good.
True.
But I think it's probably going to end up being a bit too slow. Maybe there'll be some combo that merges with it. We'll have to wait and see. Alright, but that's all 10 of the new cards. So now we'll just go through the card adjustments, then go through some buffs and nerfs. So adjustments, I don't think I'm going to spend much time on these. Riven, now you don't have she doesn't have to see the Blade of the Exile to level up. You only have to have created it. That means you can play the Blade of the Exile and then still play Riven afterwards and have her leveled. I think it's a nice functionality change. Probably doesn't change much about her. You guys have any thoughts? Or
You go ahead.
Then I'm gonna go first. Well, the fact is that now she doesn't really have to be on board when like you get a actually Blade of Exile, so it makes her a lot, easier to play, a lot less funky, and you just get to like play the blade edges and everything before she actually comes down.
So, I think it's nice in OTK decks that often rely on the champ that you pair with Riven to also be a win con. So Fizz Riven was a good example on a deck that I played a lot before the Papercraft nerf. And Fizz is a champion that you could definitely suit up with Blade of the Exile and use it in win condition. For decks like that, and you want to keep the contingency of drawing Riven as a win condition later, I think it's nice. I don't think you usually have a problem flipping her the turn that you can make the blade anyway, though, because all of the spells are focus speed. There's rarely a risk of not being able to level her the turn you play her if you have all the blade fragments. They would have to answer her immediately, and usually they don't even want to do that because it's preferable to answer her after you've committed Blade of the Exile.
Yeah, so that makes sense. I think it's just a small change. And then we have the Meta Menace, Silverwing Vanguard, taken down a peg. Which is a card that so it's going from a summon effect to a play effect, with the effect being summon an exact copy of it. The functionality isn't changing, and the reason they're doing this is because it's when it was summoned, it summoned a copy of it. So why doesn't that copy also summon it? At least some confusion, and it could also break the game potentially. So I think it's just to clean up some tech on the back end. It's whatever. I don't think we need to cover it anymore.
I agree.
Let's go on to buffs, though. So we have some buffs to the Evelyn package. We're going to start off with Steam, who is going from a unplayable 6-cost card to a much more interesting 4-cost card. His stats are being adjusted from 5/5 to 3/3, but he is keeping Scout. He still summons a Husk when he is summoned, but now, when you summon a 1-cost ally, it grants the strongest enemy vulnerable. Since his summon effect goes off for the 1-cost unit goes off when he gets summoned, that means he will when he is summoned, he'll give the strongest enemy vulnerable. So it's kind of like Hired Gun, but he also has Scout, and he gives you the Husk as well. And you can do it for your other 1-cost cards as well, or 1-cost units as well, whether it's be more Husk or other 1-cost cards like getting them from Mariah Warden.
So I think this change is amazing. Obviously, he was unplayable before because the only deck that would even look at him, other than Evelyn, I guess, would be MF Scouts. And you're never going to choose this guy over Genevieve or 6-mana Cythria. At this mana cost, he's a lot more reasonable. The deck runs a lot of ways to generate 1-mana units. It runs plenty of 1-mana units anyway, but between Island Navigator and Mariah Warden, you have plenty of opportunities to churn out the triggers with this guy. Being a 4-cost scout makes him much more reasonable to curve into certain kinds of plays that flip your champions, or do pseudo rallies with Cataclysm style effects. I think this is significant for him, and I can definitely see him going into quite a few decks at this much better curve. The second line of text is actually phenomenal.
I agree. What do you think, Woke?
So Was that this is very good. Like the second line text, especially for burst speed interactions, because it's on some effect, right? But I would not play him in Demacia decks. General Eve already does a better job as a scout unit with Challenger and can get keywords from Husk. But you can play him in other like P and Z piles where you can play Von Yip and burst speed like what was it? Scrap like the scraps scrap
Oh, the
cards,
scraps.
right?
Jury rig.
A jury rig, right? At burst speed and you can grant vulnerable, right? And then there's also the Evelyn, right? So she grants so basically you get vulnerable at the end of the round, you start a new round, you basically have two vulnerable targets if you play jury rig out, right? At burst speed for burst open attack. There's a lot of like nuance here, right? For these interactions.
Yeah,
I would
Really
like to
aggressive.
mention. I'd like to mention Faint HD recently climbed to Masters with Renekton Evelyn, and this effect is an ability that Renekton actually loves phenomenally.
True, although then you're starting to get a little bit of a glut of forecast cards. I think Evelyn in general loves this card though, because this gives her a lot more interaction in the deck. Especially if you get like the quick attack Husk gets a lot better now because all of a sudden you can start making quick attack challenger units, technically speaking. I think this is going to be a good addition for the deck. Conchu's already told me Evelyn's tier 1 is going to be broken next patch, so. And another reason for that, by the way, will be I'm just going to mention the other card quick, which is Domination getting an extra HP going from 1 HP to 2 HP.
I'm
Yeah.
a little concerned with it.
Yeah, so like Evelyn got some good buffs this patch, and Domination is more than just an Evelyn card, but I think
she's strong. She's definitely a strong card. I've been playing with Evelyn Demacia for like 3 days now, and Domination has definitely dominated a lot of decks.
Yeah, I'm a little apprehensive about this buff. I think one of the cards, just in lore in general, that are most dangerous to buff are the ones that see a lot of play in other archetypes. So we've seen people try to bring back Blade Dance card, and it's definitely put in support. And there are definitely a lot of other similar concepts. I think if the intent was to buff Evelyn, we'd want to look at something that's more of a niche synergy that contains the benefit to Evelyn. I think making this card more resilient to pings might cause it to be too much of a benefit to other archetypes, and then it will suddenly be on the nerf radar and not benefit anything.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a bigger buff to other archetypes like Aziralia. Evelyn likes to, but I mean, I think Vora no longer sees play in Evelyn decks because the big thing Vora had going for it was it had one more age, or it had +1/+1 stats, and now it only has +1/+0, which is just not worth it.
Right. Also, like
Unless you really want to have a gluttony of three cost Husk producers, I don't think you're running Vora ever.
just a reminder for like when you're playing Evelyn, like you can also just put weapons on a Husk for the extra keywords and stats, and then you get the weapon back, right? The stat, and also like you can also use a hate spike as a combat trick, technically speaking, because if you kill a Husk mid combat with hate spike, Evelyn gains the keyword. So fast speed, overwhelm, fast speed, quick attack, fast speed, impact, etc., etc.
That's really strong. I didn't know that.
Now you know today.
Well, yeah, it's useful to learn about champs that I've never played, but I may end up playing in the very near future. I don't dislike Evelyn, so I'm definitely going to give her a try with these buffs. Hopefully, there's something that the buffs will last.
Yeah.
And mostly for Evelyn.
Yeah, I think these are good changes, and I'm excited to see what's coming for Evelyn archetype. I think it's time to move on. I think we're gonna go through these next few cards a bit more quickly.
Sure.
So we have Bandle Painter, which is now it was a 3-mana 2/3 and only Bandle. It is now a Bandle PNZ card, so it's multi-region now, which means you can generate it off of Mayor. And its play effect has been updated to discard 1 to create a multi-region follower in hand and reduce its cost by 1, where before it did not reduce the cost.
I think this is actually a pretty good buff. They have done a lot of nerfs to discard as a package over the various patches. I'm not against seeing it slow down a little bit from the traditional, very fast, aggressive playstyle to more of a value-oriented one. And I think this definitely helps that quite a bit. Augment being an ability that wants to accumulate value over multiple plays, the cost reduction on getting an extra card out of it, being pretty relevant. And I think the flexibility of being dual region is definitely a big deal, especially because Bandle having exclusive access to this card doesn't help too much because traditionally Bandle has been kind of lacking in discard payoffs.
Yeah. I think this card is definitely more playable than it was, and I think being able to get this card off of Mayor is relevant. But I don't know if I'm gonna play. I'm definitely not playing this card over Mayor, and I don't know if PNZ decks are gonna want to play. Or like PNZ, like if you're playing a PNZ Nox discard deck, would you want to be playing this card still? Stuff like that. Hey, maybe Dravenside might want to play this card, but other than like that deck, I can't think of anything that wants this really main deck. Any thoughts to add to this, Woke?
Nope. I think we can go to Mistfall right now.
Alright, Mistfall. So Mistfall has been updated too. So it still draws unit equipment when you play it, but instead of refilling one spell mana and granting it the ally you equip +1/+0, each round the first time an unequipped ally is equipped, refill 2 spell mana. So I think this card is maybe now a decent one of if you're trying to tutor up an equipment, because essentially you'll pay for the equipment and make it free, and you're just paying the cost of tutor it. I think anything more than one of in this card is too many.
It's an interesting card now.
Yeah. But like I think the biggest thing would be like tutoring up. Maybe you really want Darken Fan for some reason. You could play a Mistfall to tutor it.
I'm thinking more in the auction like Lee Sin synergy, where like we keep like shuffling weapons all over again until like we basically get our like horde.
Alright, so
now that
it does.
Says, free.
Importantly about that though, Woke, it says unequipped ally, so you can't equip the weapons of the same ally and get the spell mana back, which makes it a lot worse for that kind of deck.
Well, I don't necessarily think that's true because it's easy to generate extra units to cycle your equipments with in that deck because of Bloodletters. And Bloodletters is also one of the only ones that nets you mana for playing this card.
That's true. Bloodletters does actually give you more mana back. So that could be a good synergy point as well. But I think this card might show up in some lists as a one-of for decks that really want to get specific equipment. But outside of those, I don't think this card's really going to end up seeing play.
Yeah, I think the interaction is a little bit too niche. But I do like that it draws you the equipment so that you can at least get the value train going.
Also, like three mana draw a card or draw an equipment, but it also doesn't impact the board. Famously, is not block very well. It turns out.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So moving on to some Shadow Isles buffs, we have Wraith of Echoes, going from 6 cost to 5 cost. Because people probably don't know what this card does. It says round end for each ally that died this round, grant all allied copies of everywhere +1/+1. Yeah. This card was unplayable before, and this card is a consideration now. And that consideration is that it's still probably not going to see any play.
Yeah, I think the effect is just, if you're gonna play this, why wouldn't you just play Dawn Speakers? Like it's a round end effect that triggers on something dying, and it's conditional to a specific card. So you're trying to do something cute by abusing. I don't know. Like maybe you could do it with Mythrite.
The funniest one I saw was Shadox posted a list earlier about trying to abuse Dragonlings with this.
I guess the problem is it's 5 mana, and the decks that want to abuse the same card over and over tend to be aggressive. Playing this on turn 5 is not conducive to abusing Shark Chariot or Dragonlings or Spiderlings or whatever.
Sand soldiers, I guess, maybe. Questionable.
Yeah, but again, just play domination.
But then my Sand Soldiers also get more HP. It's
Technically,
broken.
if you have like 3 sand soldiers, right, and they die on that turn, you get a +4/+4 later on. But you don't really need that, honestly. That's overkill.
Also, you don't have any access to extra attacks in SI Extrema, so it's a bit worse.
Right.
Well, I think you know what. I'm glad that they buffed this card. Maybe we'll be wrong, and something will see play with it. I'm thinking the answer is probably not. But a card that I hope will see some play is Vaults of Helia, which is going from 5 to 4 mana. So, for those who don't know, it's if you can, it's a 4 mana landmark in SI that says if you can kill your most expensive ally to summon an ally from your deck that costs 1 more. So this is a very powerful effect if you build your deck around it. You can essentially just tutor out a curve, and you can have like trigger death effects. Like for example, you could play a Grizzled Ranger, and then you could kill that to summon a Radiant Guardian, which is pretty strong. But you can like have like 1 unit of a specific cost in your deck, and this card will then tutor it out from your deck if you build it correctly. Which I mean, it's a very powerful effect from Magic, I know, but
Yeah, that's actually the comparison I was going to make. It is now the same mana as Birthing Pod from Magic the Gathering.
yeah, I mean the biggest difference is one, you don't really get to choose what dies. If you have 2 units at the same cost, roll a dice and hope for the best that unit you wanted to die is going to be the one that dies. And you're
Right.
always killing the most expensive ally, whereas sometimes you want to like not kill your most expensive ally. You want to kill your like 2-drop, for example.
Correct. And
But
Birthing Pod also gives you a little bit of flexibility over when you do it. So, with the way Magic the Gathering works, sacrificing the card that you're up trading is part of the cost of the effect. So, in other words, as soon as you activate Birthing Pod in Magic, the creature is dead. Your opponent doesn't get a chance to kill the creature in response and stop you from tutoring. Now, they can counter it, like denying a skill and lore. But the big issue with this card is it gives your opponent a lot of opportunities to disrupt the effect, to diminish the value you get, control what cost of card you're going to sacrifice. So if they see that you've got like a 6-drop in board, and they're thinking, oh man, this guy's going to go get like a Rekindler and revive a champion and get a bunch of value and completely destroy me. So they know to prioritize killing that, and they have a lot of flexibility in over how they interact with this card, and I don't like that.
Yep. Another
Yeah.
issue with this card, someone who has played this card in the past, is if you draw those cards that cost that mana cost, it doesn't work anymore. Like, say you have a 4-drop on board and you draw both your 5-drops, it doesn't kill those 4-drops to find something. So if you like draw the cards in your curve that you don't want to draw, this doesn't trigger, which is
Right.
bad.
There's a lot of potential. Like rock bears on like turn 2, right? And then you play like Helio on turn 4, you potentially get a 6-drop on turn 5. There's also the fact that like you can play Remitter on turn 5, right? To get a 7-cost unit on an I don't know what. And you could get an 8-drop, potentially speaking, on turn 6.
Oh, you're on the raw rock kills school of Helia rock bears, I see.
There's also Remitter is a good card. You can also get a 9-drop with like Abominable Guardian.
That is true.
Those are certainly lines that can occur in a game of LOR. But I think I'm gonna try out Vault of Helia to see if there's a build for it. It's one of my cards. It's one of the cards that I used to build around that I liked a lot. I'm excited to see if it still is playable. The answer is probably not because it wasn't playable before. But maybe it's playable now. Who knows? But we have a few nerfs to go over. And because we're approaching an hour, we're probably gonna go through these a little bit fast. So Reveler's Feast goes from burst speed to focus speed. I personally think this card is just dead in aggro now. Burst speed doing this during the Declare Blockers phase was absolutely massive for the card, and the fact that you have to pre-commit this just completely ruins it. And I personally think that like pirates and stuff like that is just going to go away.
So, yeah, I definitely am not a fan of this nerf. Part of the big appeal of playing this at burst speed was to enhance a wide attack, so going, 4 or more units wide, ideally 6 wide with this card, and then as you said, doing the declare blocker step. Having to deal 2 to a unit to play the effect as a pre-commit makes it significantly harder to maintain a wide board. Wide boards don't typically have very high HP units, so you have to hope that you've got some sort of 3 HP unit that you can do it on. And that leaves whatever that is much more susceptible to any kind of interaction. Maybe your 3 HP unit is barely hanging on, and now some of the damage you would have pushed gets removed by a pokey stick. This card is still okay, but I don't think it's a lot less playable than it was.
I think this card is just not going to see play in aggro decks, and I think aggro decks are going to have to shift because they can't play Revelers anymore.
Hard to agree on those. I mean, like the fact that like its focus speed means that your opponent can now like properly block into the right units whenever they want to, and also the fact that you can't just like kill your own units now without like thinking about how the opponent's going to block. Because you could do that before.
Yeah, like you can't kill your own units to deny lifesteal. You can't threaten more damage after you declare an attack like you could with Revelers. Or like you could before when this was first speed, because like before your opponent just might not block your attack because they know they would take more because of Revelers. Whereas now, they just know whatever damage you're presenting on the attack is how much damage you're dealing with those units,
Correct.
so they can set the block down. Yeah, so I think that's going to be a massive shift in how that deck plays. And speaking of massive shifts to cards, Atrocity is finally killed, going from fast to slow speed. And by that, I mean this card is a lot worse now at slow speed. This card, like, I remember like a year ago when Nasus was meta, people were begging for this card to go to slow speed. And it turns out the straw that broke the camel's back was actually Tristana.
Imagine telling someone that a year ago. I don't know how I feel about this. I think that win cons in lore in general are good. Obviously sometimes some win cons are a little too good, but this card is basically not playable now. If you're going to run this kind of effect, you could just go in for Dragon's Kick, which a lot of people have talked about. And even then, I don't really think Dragon's Kick is playable. This card's dead. Now, I did want to mention that because this used to be a back-off win condition for Field Rush, I think that playing Freljord Targon ramp, basically similar to Targon's Peak, but without Peak, is a good consideration. Aurelion Soul is a very strong choice to pull out of FTR, and auto levels, assuming that your other champ of choice doesn't get some sort of damage on it. And I think that most of the package at this point is already in Freljord, and you could find a way to work out some sort of alternative interaction package through Targon.
Like playing Sunburst instead of Vengeance, stuff like that.
Right, and I think Sunburst is actually better in certain matchups. Anything that really buffs up a unit. Sunburst is arguably better in specific instances. I don't know. I think it's definitely worth looking into. A lot of the appeal of running Shadow Isles for Field of Rush has reduced. We've got some incentive with the new reduce your spells in deck guy for Ionia. And we've lost some incentive for Shadow Isles, which makes Targon look kind of interesting. Yeah. I know Vengevine was talking about it earlier today, so I'd like to see what that looks like.
For sure. Also, I just want to take a moment to talk about the Tristana conspiracy theory, alright? Alright, hear me out. So whenever Tristana becomes good in a deck, that deck gets immediately nerfed. Like, Tristana started seeing some play in Bandletree, bam, Bandletree gets changed. Tristana starts seeing play with the Demacia Yordle Arms deck, bam, he eats a bullet. Now she sees play in both Noxus Go Wide Aggro and SI more controlling with Atrocity, bam, both those decks immediately eat nerfs.
Sad.
I think the devs are actually just out to get Tristana, and they gave her a buff just to give you a false sense of security. Like, okay, she's gonna be just fine. Bam, they like nerf everything about her. All right, that's all I got for that. Well, any thoughts on Atro going to slow or no?
I already seen the Skarzik tweet that he is inevitable.
Yeah.
This is a sign that he will now lead all the balance changes.
God, I sure hope not. He's got some terrible takes.
All right, 2 more cards. Wandering Shepherd, Targon Bandle, dual region card. Goes from a 2/2 to a 2/1. I think this is a pretty decent hit to stuff like Elusives and Pantheon decks. I think you're still going to play it for its effect, but it's gonna be a lot worse on defense, especially now that it dies to pings, and it's gonna be a lot less sturdy when it gets has to wear that equipment, so it's a lot easier to remove. I think solid change. I think it's probably not going to affect the card too much. I still think you're playing it in the spots you would play it before.
I think the flexibility of the card definitely justifies a very slight nerf here. It makes it a little worse for it to self-equip. So there are definitely equipments that make a lot more sense for it now to be pings. So the tough frying pan becomes a little bit better for this guy. But I agree. I think the decks that want to use it for the fact that it puts an equipment on something else still want that.
Anything to add, Woke?
Nope, not at all.
All right, last card. Ravoon, Daylight Sphere. Goes back to being a
Bless.
5/5 after going to a 5/6. I think this makes perfect sense. Daybreak has really shot up since the rework to the archetype, and I think Ravoon going back to a 5/5 is perfectly fine.
So I think this is dancing around the issue of Leonia becoming very powerful since the rework. I don't think this changes the functionality of the deck at all. This guy is top end primarily. His main use is as a top end effect with Leona for an aggro deck. I don't think the extra point of HP was making or breaking him. I think the text matters a lot more. Being able to stun lock your opponent out of having blockers or relevant threats if you're on the defense matters a lot more, and I don't think 5 HP is making or breaking your ability to disrupt that too easily.
Well, I think like it's a little bit easier to remove now, or it's easier to block it and then throw a removal spell at it to kill it, whereas before it's a little bit more difficult to remove. So I think softening him up a little bit, making the deck a little bit more vulnerable to some damage-based interaction is fine.
Like a 5/6 on turn 5 almost always trades well, no matter what, because it has 6 HP. In comparison to a 5/5, which some units usually have like 5 attack on that turn.
Right. I agree with that.
But like, I mean, as long as you're careful, you wouldn't, put it out there to like attack, technically speaking. As with your like point earlier. But,
I've seen a lot of people say when we talk about aggro lineup construction, a lot of people run Noxus Targon, but they say it's the weaker aggro deck, and I do not get that because on numbers, it consistently performs either straight up the best or top 2 or 3, and has way more reach into the late game than almost any other aggro deck. I think the Leona Raven package, the synergy between those two, allows you to extend into decks that other aggro decks would just crumple to and run out of cards trying to fight through removal.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and we'll see how much this is going to end up hitting the Targon Noxus aggro decks. I mean, I think some of these other card adjustments will affect that as well. I think the Reveler's Feast nerf probably hurts that deck a bit, because they often had wider boards with some beefier units. They actually might be able to get away with the focus speed because they could. Leona Targon or Leona Noxus generally had beefier units, so I guess you could try to throw this on one of them beforehand, but I'll have to see how much that's going to end up affecting things. And that is the final balance change for this patch. There's some competitive things, some new formats. Daily Rumbles are starting at 10 a.m. now instead of like 7 p.m., which is amazing. Now it's going to be a way easier to or no, not. It was like it was a different
10
time.
a.m. PST. Just a
10 a.m.
reminder.
10 a.m. PST, which would be 4 p.m. PST, which is a lot better to actually be able to get in and play some games. Like the extra 6 hours is gonna make it a lot easier. Like now I can play after I get home from work instead of having to wait till like after dinner and then like late at night. So it's probably a lot easier to make them.
I think the main benefit for that is for the OCE players. I was actually listening to a video by Spides reviewing the Champion Draft format, and she touched briefly on, the time zone issues with the draft schedule, or rather the Rumble schedule. So this definitely brings a lot more players into the equation. Should be pretty interesting. But I agree, the flexibility, because that was the main thing. The absolute 100% everyone agreed about an improvement on the Runeterra Open was schedule flexibility. So I think adding that to the Rumble doesn't really hurt anything.
For sure, I think making it more accessible to all the time zones is great. I think the extra 6 hours probably won't impact. I guess the biggest thing is that if it impacts queue times a bit, where it might be harder to get into games because there'll be less people queuing at certain times where they would have been queuing before. So we'll have to see.
Right.
Well, they'll have to see how that works out. Also, some new formats coming up with a 30 HP Nexus and the return of Triple Region Singleton. So interesting to see how that works out. Additionally, Singleton will be the Runeterra Open format instead of best of 3. So interested to see how that will turn out. But
I am definitely not going to be playing the 30 Nexus HP format. Um,
Tragic.
I asked people what the best deck for that would be, and they said Rise, and I realized they were right, and I stopped thinking about it.
right, combo decks want more room to breathe, and 10 extra HP does that better than literally anything else.
Yep.
So
And
that's kind of
decks
what
have
it
a
comes
hard
down
time
to.
burning through that. So.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Also, oh yeah, one thing I should remembered. By the way, it's Spids, not Spides. By the way.
Oh.
It is what it is. Anyways, anything important in the bug fixes section? Alright, so there's one that I wanted to go talk about briefly, which is that they fixed an issue where a level 2 Seraphine would not copy a new spell if that spell was already copied by another unit on her left. So this matters specifically for either Ionia or if you get multiple Seraphines in play. So, like, if you had like a Karma on the left and a Seraphine on the right, she wouldn't copy the spells because Karma's copying it first. Whereas now you'll actually doesn't matter. She'll always copy the spell, so it lets you like triple spell easier. But it's a very minor thing that's not going to see that much realistic application. But I like that it's there.
That's good. I do think they missed one other bug that is Seraphine related, which is people still have her in their collection and are allowed to deck build with her. But I'm hoping they'll get on that at some point and fix that issue.
Well, I think they're already. Unfortunately, they did just print a new card that is pretty decent with her. But maybe maybe they did also give you some more interaction, more fun cards to use for your people's pillar pile. So we'll have to see.
That's true. I'm excited. All right, well that's it for me.
Yeah, and that's it for me as well. Woke had to head out, so he left a little early. But yeah, I think that's everything for this. Thank you for joining me, Woke and Walk. Had a lovely time with you folks going over these cards, and I can't wait to see how wrong we were about some of them.
All right, you all have a great night.
Yep. See you later.